They sued me. In court. In public. My own parents dragged me in front of a judge and told the world I didn't deserve the house my grandfather built. They forged my name, erased me from the deed, and tried to bury me like I was a bad chapter in their family legacy.
Hi.
I'm Seraphine. I served 25 years in Cyber Command. But the real war started when I came home. Have you ever looked at the people who raised you and realized they were never on your side? What would you do if your bloodline became your battlefield? Tell me in the comments, who do you trust when your own family becomes the enemy? Let me take you back to the moment I stood in court in uniform and watched it all collapse. They're not just suing me, they're erasing me. I walked into that courtroom in full dress uniform, not because I needed to, but because they needed to see it. Every medal, every stripe, every silent scar sewn into the hem of my jacket was a testimony to where I'd been. But to them, I was just a name they wanted to delete. I scanned the benches, packed with reporters, neighbors, and strangers who once called me a war hero. Not one familiar face. Not even hers. My mother's seat sat empty beside me, the white upholstery pristine, untouched. The kind of absence that cut louder than rejection. The bailiff called out, Dalka versus Dalka. My last name twice, like a mirror fractured down the center. I took a breath, and for a moment, I wasn't in that courtroom. I was back on base. The flag ceremony, the smell of oil and metal, my commanding officer pinning the last medal to my chest and whispering, "You're done. Go home." I'd smiled then because I thought home still meant something. Because I thought I'd get to wrap my arms around my mother again. Instead, I got served, and as I stood, staring into the rows of judgment, I heard my grandfather's voice. The old man who raised me more than Henry ever did. You don't need a battlefield to know who's behind you.
He was right.
And now I was standing alone. Talia strutted in, draped in a pastel suit like this was a charity luncheon, not a legal ambush. Her voice dripped with artificial warmth as she smiled toward the press. We just want clarity and fairness. Family deserves truth. Brent stood beside her, his hand gripping hers a beat too tight. I caught the twitch in her knuckles. Even snakes have tells. Just behind them, an older man in a veteran's cap leaned toward another in the gallery. Disgraceful, he muttered, not realizing I could hear. I didn't flinch. I just logged it. And then came Henry Dalka, my father, regal in his pressed coat, his silver cufflinks catching courtroom light like a dagger edge. He took the stand with a theatrical sigh and began. My daughter Seraphine abandoned this family. She left without explanation, disappeared for years. The home in question? She forfeited that the day she walked away. His words were clipped, deliberate, designed to shred. Their attorney followed like clockwork. With smug precision, he laid out a printed transfer of property. Here is the signed release, he said, holding up a copy with my name on it. Your Honor, she voluntarily renounced all claim. I stood. That's not my signature. Murmurs broke through the courtroom like a fuse lit beneath dry brush. The judge banged the gavel. On the bench, Judge Callister, a gray-haired man with steel eyes, leaned forward, clearly displeased. Enough. We will investigate the validity of the document. Until then, all parties are frozen. 48-hour continuance. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I turned toward Henry. You said you wanted peace. This is war. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a tight squeeze, Brent's hand crushing Talia's again. Her polished smile faltered. And beside me, a single seat remained conspicuously unfilled. Mom's. She never showed. As I stepped out of the chamber, I heard soft footsteps. A court clerk, pretending to organize files, slipped a folded piece of paper into the side pocket of my coat. No words. I unfolded it in the hallway. They forged everything. Meet me. No signature. No timestamp. But the address scribbled below was unmistakable. I went alone. The building was an old record archive facility, long defunded, its corridors humming with dying fluorescence. I followed the hallway toward a half-lit room. Inside, a woman, nervous, thin, likely a mid-level clerk, was waiting with a thick manila folder. She didn't introduce herself, just slid the file across the table. Inside, the original property transfer document. Wrong notary seal, wrong encode, wrong timestamp metadata, and a signature that screamed forgery. I stared down at it, my pulse slowing, sharpening. Myra hadn't come to court today, but she would want to see this. And then I caught the smallest detail. A carbon smudge on the lower edge. A printing error we used to catch in Cyber Command, unique to outdated authentication scanners. This wasn't just forged. It was forged poorly. If this is forged, I whispered, they just declared war. Somewhere in the silence, I heard the old echo of my grandfather's voice. Don't wait for them to tell you who you are. Remind them. You erased me on paper. Now I'll erase your paper trail. I stared at the document spread across Myra's desk, my jaw tight as her finger traced the forged signature again. Look, she said, voice steady, compare the downstroke on this. Yours always curves inward. This one doesn't know who you are. I didn't flinch. I had seen worse lies, bodies folded under data, identities rewritten in war zones. But this was personal. This was home. The room was cramped, lined with old law books and cracked window panes that jittered under the soft push of Ohio rain. Myra's office sat tucked inside the library at Riverstone Law School, where we once shared ramen and final exam breakdowns. Today, that comfort was gone, replaced by legal pads, printouts, highlighters, and war. She laid out 2 documents, one from county records, the official transfer of ownership with my forged signature, and the original copy from the archive clerk. Same notary ID, same document number, Myra said. But guess what? The notary was suspended 8 months ago for falsifying DMV forms. I heard my grandfather's voice again from when I was 14, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. Paper doesn't lie, he said, handing me his birth certificate. But the hands that sign it do. It echoed now, a warning from the grave. A ping on Myra's laptop broke the silence. Incoming call. Cody Brandt. I clicked to accept. Cody's familiar face lit up the screen, sharp buzz cut, eyes that didn't miss a pixel. Got your shell company trace, he said. Walker Holdings. Filed under Brent's logistics firm. Cross-referenced with 3 open investigations: South Dakota, Nevada, and Belize. Guess what? Same tax ID trails. That's no accident. Belize? Myra raised an eyebrow. I leaned forward. Can we prove Talia's involved? Cody grinned, pulling up a transaction log. Already did. She wired $38,000 to a holding group that doesn't exist. The receiver account? It disappears into an international freight black hole. Myra sat back, whistling low. They're not just cutting you out. They're laundering their legacy. And just then, Faye messaged, "No greeting. Just one line. Metadata doesn't lie." She attached a screenshot. Metadata records from the PDF of the forged deed. IP trace? Brent's laptop. Device ID? Registered to the Walker home network. I stood. They wanted war. Let's give them spectacle. Myra blinked. What are you planning? They're throwing a birthday party, I said, grabbing my coat. Let's bring candles. The house looked the same, and nothing like it at all. Lanterns flickered on the porch. Fake florals hung from a rented arch. The "Happy Birthday, Mom" banner stretched across the fence like a performance. I walked past a neighbor who double-taked but said nothing. Inside, laughter swirled around wine glasses and expensive plates. Brent gave some performative toast about gratitude and continuity. Talia stood at the center of it, radiant and rehearsed. Until I stepped into the room. The music faltered, as if the speakers themselves choked. I didn't wait. I pulled out the folder and let the papers fall like feathers around her heels. "These," I said, my voice cutting clean through crystal clinks, "are accounts tied to shell companies in 3 states. Each routed through Vocker Holdings. Each signed using my stolen data."
Gasps.
Murmurs. Phones raised. Talia reached for a wine glass and dropped it. The sound of it shattering was sharper than any gavel. Brent stepped forward, teeth clenched. "You're trespassing." "I'm testifying," I said. "And your living room is the witness box." Have you ever been betrayed so publicly by people who should have stood beside you privately? That hollow moment when family treats you like an intruder in a life you helped build. If you've ever felt cut out of your own story, drop a comment with number 7 below. Let's see what truth I uncover next. From the corner, I caught it. A flash from a phone. One of the waiters, early 20s, phone in hand, had snapped the document. Another guest leaned to a friend and whispered, "Isn't she the actual daughter?" I turned to leave. Behind me, Myra's voice echoed in my memory. "They think you'll break when you're wounded. They don't realize you're forged under pressure." That night, I sat in my car 2 blocks away. The adrenaline was ebbing, but the fire wasn't gone. My phone buzzed. Gil Carmack. One video. A black van, no plates, pulling into the alley behind the house. Timestamp. 3:14 a.m. Brent's voice on the grainy audio. "Package is here. Move quick." I replayed it. Then I stared at the house that used to be mine, now lit up like nothing happened, like truth didn't just slice through its walls. But now I knew it wasn't just about inheritance. It was a front, and the war wasn't over. It had just found its next battlefield. They used my grandfather's basement to smuggle lies in crates. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I had to do it alone. I pulled the collar of my jacket higher against the damp air as I crouched beside the side gate, eyes on the dark shell of the house that once held everything good in my childhood. The rusted fence creaked faintly under my elbow as I slipped the small recording camera into the gravel beneath the steps. I angled it just right, facing the basement door like an eye that wouldn't blink. It was just past 11. The alley behind the house smelled of damp leaves, diesel, and cold metal. The security cameras that once guarded the corners had been yanked down weeks ago. The new owners, as they called themselves, didn't want witnesses, unless they controlled the footage. The smell of that alley brought back a memory I hadn't touched in years. The last time I'd been in that basement was with my grandfather. I must have been 17. We sat on the dusty concrete floor, surrounded by his old radios and World War memorabilia. He showed me the original copy of his will, wrapped in plastic, tucked beneath the floorboards under the radio stand. "If they ever try to take what's yours," he said, "you'll find the truth here. Paper doesn't lie, but people do. And sometimes the ones who smile loudest are the ones digging your grave." Myra was on standby 3 blocks away, her laptop open in a 24-hour print shop converted into our war room. Gil Carmack had given me a rough sketch of the house's original basement layout, sketched in pencil on old mechanic's paper, folded in half a dozen times. "Just in case," he said. He'd lived next door long enough to know what wasn't right. I texted Myra. "In position." She responded instantly with a thumbs-up emoji and a line of code confirming the video sync. Her readiness was my net. Faye had also sent me one final scan of the power logs. I read her message again. Energy spike plus 400% after midnight.
Consistent. Dirty.
No further comment. She let the data speak. At 12:32 a.m., the first vehicle arrived. No plates. No headlights. A matte black van, followed by a second. Both backed into the driveway like they'd done it 100 times. 4 men emerged, 2 from each vehicle, dressed in dark cargo jackets, moving fast and quiet like a well-oiled crew. They hauled wooden crates, no markings, each the size of a mini fridge, straight into the side door, down to the basement. From my spot in the shadows, I watched Brent step out from the garage. He held a flashlight, clicked it 3 times, short, long, long. My stomach turned. That was Morse code. The same sequence my grandfather used to tap on my door, as a child, our little code. Our private signal. Brent was using it now, stealing even that. A sudden rustle in the weeds to my left made me flinch. A thin, scrappy cat bolted past my knee, vanishing under the porch. I caught my breath and stilled my hand. Just a cat. But the timing? Too perfect. I pressed forward, heart thudding. I slipped through a small break in the fence, crawling low, my hands scraping against cold brick. I reached the rear vent, twisted the mesh grate gently aside, and slid the recorder into place, mic pointed into the basement's darkness. It was faint.
Tinny.
But the words came through. Hopdong ko by Hop Lo. Ko ta kong ko ten gio day. Henry's voice.
Calm.
Measured. Brutal. She has no legal stake here.
Keep going.
I froze. Every instinct screamed to bolt, but I stayed. My hand moved automatically to the medallion around my neck, the one from my grandfather. I gripped it tight as another voice spoke. What if she comes back again? Henry again, colder now. If she keeps digging, sever the tie. The last word hit harder than a slap. I started to move back, heart racing, when something caught the corner of my eye. One of the vans was still open. Inside, a man sat perfectly still, not moving, not watching his phone, not blinking, just staring out into the alley. At me. I didn't move. Neither did he. Then, as if acknowledging we were both real, he slowly shut the door. I pulled back into the brush and crawled out without a sound. Back in the car, I didn't turn the engine on. I uploaded the video files to an encrypted drive and emailed them from a ghost address to the Ohio Department of Fiscal Oversight and an independent journalist at the Rust Belt Review. Subject line: When family business hides more than greed. By morning, the article was live. Headline: Suspected unlicensed inventory operation in residential zone. Brent's photo wasn't on it, but the house address was. One neighbor, Mrs. Fairley, peeked out her blinds, phone in hand.
She didn't gasp.
She didn't act surprised, just pulled the curtain closed, like she'd known all along, and chose to stay quiet. That night, Faye called. She never calls. The blueprint you gave me, she said, her voice as sharp as ever, has changed. I blinked. Changed? There's a sealed subchamber. It wasn't there 6 months ago. No permit. No record. My hand drifted to my chest, brushing the medallion again. I remembered how Grandpa had placed it in my palm the day he updated his will. Then that's where the real crime lives, I said. In the silence, I looked down and saw the metal glint faintly from the dashboard light. I smiled, not because this was over, but because it had only just begun. One forged signature. One buried room. One final crack in their empire. I wasn't nervous. Not this time. I sat perfectly still in the courtroom's front row, fingers interlocked, my eyes locked ahead. No uniform today, just a gray buttoned shirt, pressed flat, collar stiff against my throat. It wasn't for humility. It was war paint in neutral tones. Outside, news vans lined the block. Inside, the gallery was packed tighter than before. Reporters scribbled. Clerks whispered. Myra stood next to me, her expression unreadable, chin slightly lifted, jaw set like a drawn line. Last night, she had submitted document X into the sealed evidence log. She hadn't told me what time. She didn't have to. I trusted the rhythm of her offense. My hand grazed the edge of my sleeve, and a memory flared. Sharp, unwelcome. The day Grandpa died. I'd been 3 hours late coming from Romania, stuck on a black ops assignment. I rushed straight to the hospital only to find the door locked. My father stood on the other side, refusing to let me in.
He's gone, was all he said.
No chance to say goodbye. Later, a nurse slipped me a folded note. Grandpa's last words. Don't let the wolves tear apart what I left for you. His handwriting was jagged, weak, but the message clear. And now that message was law. Across the aisle, they arrived one by one. Talia in silk and smugness. Brent pacing already. Henry walked in last, measured, regal, untouched. But I saw it, the hesitation in his step as he took his seat. He knew, somewhere inside, he knew the ground had shifted. Myra rose first. Your Honor, per the court's motion for supplemental disclosures, we request presentation of document X. The judge nodded. Myra clicked her remote. On the screen appeared a lease agreement. Clean, high resolution, fully notarized. Commercial use agreement between Walker Holdings LLC and warehouse property on 1450 Windmere Lane. The signatory? Henry Dalka. The judge leaned forward. Myra didn't blink. This document establishes not only intent to use a residential property for commercial storage, but also direct ownership under a shell company tied to 3 separate financial probes. Faye's voice came next, patched and remotely. Calm, clipped, surgical. We conducted metadata tracing on the file, IP logs, document timestamps, GPS tracking from the signatory device. All originate from Henry Dalka's registered work terminal, 2 months prior to the alleged property dispute. The gallery stirred. I stood slowly and walked to the board. I pulled up a map, marked in red and blue. 3 shell companies. 5 hidden accounts. 8 overnight transfers. All triangulated through Walker Holdings, registered to a freight entity under Brent's name. Talia's hand moved involuntarily to her throat. Brent's eyes darted. He whispered something, but Talia didn't respond. Her posture collapsed slightly, her spine retreating into her chair. Then Myra played the recording. If she finds out, sever the tie. I don't care how. Henry's voice.
Clear. Crooked.
Irrefutable. For a beat, the courtroom was soundless. Even the AC hum seemed to vanish. A low audio filter seemed to swallow the noise. Only that one phrase remained. Sever the tie. A ripple of recognition passed through the rows. A law clerk tapped his colleague and mouthed, "That's his voice." At the far end, a young intern underlined fake leasing 3 times in his legal pad and boxed my name beside it. The judge requested a 10-minute recess. When we returned, 2 officers had moved positions, now standing 5 feet from Brent. The judge didn't look up from the papers. This court finds substantial evidence suggesting premeditated fraud, signature forgery, and illegal property conversion. He raised his gaze. This is no longer a civil matter. This is a financial crimes investigation. Brent bolted upright. That warehouse isn't even registered. The words hung.
Loud.
Final. Talia jerked toward him, eyes wide. It was too late. Everyone had heard. One reporter gasped audibly. Another scribbled fast enough to tear paper. Behind them, a law clerk slid out his phone and typed to someone. Scandal of the year. At the edge of the room, a court assistant nudged her phone discreetly toward her friend. The message: Holy hell, this is bigger than the Mayer case. Henry shut his eyes. Not for shock. Just 3 long seconds of resignation. He didn't even blink. He just sat back and took it. The judge held up a hand. The court hereby suspends all civil dispute proceedings until criminal review is complete. This case will be referred to the district attorney. Then came the final tremor. 2 uniformed officers stepped through the side door. One approached Myra, leaned in, and whispered something low. She only nodded once. Then he turned to the judge and handed over a signed warrant. The judge looked at it, then to us. We're executing a search of the Windmere Lane basement. Effective tonight. Brent's hands curled into fists. I turned slightly, just enough to meet Myra's eye. Then I whispered, "Let's see what else they buried." She nodded, and the room began to fracture. The empire my father built, paper by paper, was starting to burn from within, and I hadn't even lit the match yet. They thought the courtroom was their shield. It became their stage of collapse. The air outside the courthouse was heavier than usual, tighter. Reporters had camped out since dawn, their cameras already rolling by the time I arrived. But I didn't stop to look at them. I didn't need to. I wasn't the one on trial anymore. Inside, the security presence had doubled. Officers lined the hallway walls, their eyes steady, earpieces tucked in. Even the clerks walked faster than yesterday. Something had shifted. The court wasn't just hosting another case today, it was preparing for impact. Brent stood at the defense table in a sharp navy suit, freshly shaved. Talia sat beside him in a flowing white dress that screamed innocence, but her eyes kept darting to the gallery. Henry appeared last. No cane. No gesture of weakness. Only stillness, his face unreadable, but his jaw shade too tight. I took my seat beside Myra, who laid out the new case files with the calm precision of a surgeon prepping for open heart.
She didn't speak. She didn't need to.
At 9:03 a.m., the judge entered. The room stood, then settled like a held breath. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, following the overnight warrant execution at 1450, Windmere Lane, we submit our updated report. On screen appeared the basement's blueprint, revised with a sealed chamber. Then came a series of images, racks of encrypted equipment, a safe marked with no serial number, crates of electronics, and high-volume fans rerouted for cooling servers. It wasn't storage. It was infrastructure. The prosecutor turned a page. Recovered payment logs from the last 6 months link accounts under Talia Dalka's name to 3 shell companies, each funneling funds through offshore logistics managed by Brent Walker. As he said it, a single sentence replayed in my head, a line I hadn't thought of since the wedding video Talia showed on social media. Brent raising a glass and laughing. Dalka bloodline never breaks. The camera had panned to Henry then, proud and silent.
And now,
that same bloodline was about to be chained by the wrists in public. Myra clicked a remote. A USB file opened, listing shipment dates, timestamps, internal photos, and bank transfers. Every line, every code, told a story no one could deny. Next, a witness took the stand, a senior officer from the raid. He didn't hesitate. Mr. Walker was on site during 3 confirmed deliveries. He gave direct access clearance via a third-party app tied to his personal account. Brent's shoulders flinched. Then I stood. No need to be sworn in again. The courtroom hushed as I crossed to the stand, adjusted the mic, and spoke clearly. They said I had no place, that I was forgotten, but they used my name, my history, my blood. They buried me under forged deeds, only to build an empire of fraud on top of it. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It pulsed. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, steady, slow, like a countdown. Every background sound faded, the scraping of pens, the squeak of shoes, muted to the rhythm of breath and pulse. And then came the final signal. The judge nodded once to the bailiffs. The first officer stepped forward. A ripple passed through the benches. Another followed, hands at their belts. The air tightened. Then came the reading. Henry Dalka, charged with federal document falsification, illicit property acquisition, and conspiracy to commit financial laundering. The moment the cuffs clicked around his wrists, a hush swept the room like the vacuum before a storm. Brent Walker, charged with unlicensed transport of controlled tech, federal tax evasion, and facilitation of illegal asset channels. Brent jolted. "This is a setup," he barked, eyes flashing toward Talia. "Tell them. Say something." But Talia was already gone inside herself. Talia Dalka, charged with aiding and abetting financial misrepresentation, perjury, and co-conspiracy in asset seizure. She gasped as the cuffs clicked, then snapped. "You planned this." I stood, not even turning as I replied.
No.
"I prepared for it. Have you ever been pushed aside, only to rise with receipts and fire in your hands? That moment when the people who underestimated you realize too late. If you've ever come back stronger than they expected, leave a comment with number 9 below. And now, let's witness how an empire finally crumbles. Flashbulbs burst. Reporters shouted. Chairs scraped. And underneath it all, a slow-motion blur. The cuffs, the pull of the arms, the resistance then surrender. From the left row, a man in an old army jacket stood, placed a hand over his chest, and nodded once toward me. No words, just acknowledgement.
I saw him.
I understood. As the three were led past the bar, Brent shouted her name again. Talia. His voice cracked. His entire act shattered with it. A young journalist leaned forward, voice raised above the din. "Ms. Landon, how did one woman pull this off?" Myra's reply was ice, perfect and true.
She didn't.
She was the operation. Then came the final cut. Henry, hands bound, was the last to be walked past me. He paused. Cold steel and eye contact. "You don't win anything," he hissed. "You just exposed us." I didn't move. That's what justice is. And that was the moment the empire of Bloodline finally collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. They took my house, my name, and my blood. But they forgot. I was trained to reclaim ground. For weeks had passed. No reporters. No flashbulbs. No courtrooms. Just me, standing in front of a slab of black granite polished like midnight, where silence carried more weight than verdicts. The Defense Service library was empty that morning. Late autumn had stripped the trees, and golden leaves rustled against the steps as I climbed toward the wall of honor. I wasn't in uniform today, but I carried everything that made me earn it. Myra stood beside me, her presence as steady as always. She handed me an envelope. The final ruling. The court's official transfer of ownership. "It's yours," she said softly. I opened the letter, read the sentence that declared me as the sole legal heir, then folded it neatly back. "Burn it or frame it, it won't change anything," I said. "I'm not going back there." She nodded, understanding without reply. My eyes rose to the wall. There, etched into the obsidian stone, was my name. Colonel Seraphine Dalka. Cyber Command. 1998 to 2023. I lifted my hand and placed it gently against the cold surface. The grooves of each letter cut deep. Permanent. Unarguable. It was the one place no one could rewrite. I remembered the first day of basic training. scribbling Dalka S. in pencil inside my helmet. I'd asked the drill sergeant if it was allowed. Your name is your first weapon, he said. Don't ever let them steal it. They had tried. My own family. They stole deeds, forged my signature, erased me from records. But not from here. Not from the place that mattered. A library attendant approached quietly. In her hand was an old album, the leather cover cracked, binding softened by years. She handed it to me without speaking. Inside, black and white photos. Me, a child, laughing in the backyard beside Grandpa. Another of him hoisting a homemade antenna in the garden. And tucked inside the back page, a note. Handwritten. Familiar. Even when you aren't mentioned by name, I still see you. Mom. I stared at it, breath held. Not a reconciliation. Not forgiveness. But acknowledgement. A thread. As I closed the album, I noticed a small girl standing near the wall, maybe 7 or 8, staring at the names. She looked at me, eyes wide, not with fear, but with recognition. Her mother called softly from a distance. She didn't move, just looked at my boots, then at the letters behind me. I nodded to her. Her lips didn't move, but I saw it in her eyes. Something had changed. I walked out of the library into the open air. Leaves crunched. The world was quiet. That afternoon, across the city, Brent, Talia, and Henry sat cuffed behind reinforced glass. The federal prosecutor read the charges: fraud, laundering, asset theft. No bail. Assets frozen. Shell companies dissolved. Their legacy turned to footnotes in a scandal that would dominate headlines for weeks. The family that faked it all. Some articles used the phrase like a punchline. I never gave a quote. Never faced a camera. The only image used was an old one, me in full uniform, lips tight, eyes unreadable. And that was enough. A name can be shouted or it can be carved. Mine had been both. As I took one last glance at the wall, I noticed the light catch on the grooves of the letters, sharp, deliberate. I stepped back half a pace, standing tall, arms at my side, shoulders square. No smile, no tears, just posture, as if reporting to the truth. A soft piano note echoed faintly from the library's overhead system. Just a single key pressed again and again, like memory itself ticking. I could hear my own breath settle in the space between sounds, mixing with the distant rustle of leaves outside, every bit of nature falling into rhythm. Beside me, a man with a veteran's cap and cane approached slowly.
He didn't speak.
Just stood next to me, his gaze fixed on the wall. Then, without turning, he gave a slight nod, more powerful than words. I returned it. 2 generations, bound by names and silence. When I turned to leave, I passed the front desk. Myra was already speaking quietly with the clerk. I stopped, pulled a small note from my coat pocket, and placed it carefully on the wood surface. It read, "Don't let them write your story. Write it yourself." And then I walked out, back into the cool air. The wind picked up just enough to scatter a few leaves across the steps. The little girl was gone, but the echo of her gaze stayed with me. That night, when the screen lit up on its own and the message appeared, I didn't flinch. What you exposed is just one node. You ready to go deeper, Colonel? I didn't pause. I typed, "Send the data." I didn't need the house.
I didn't need the money.
What I reclaimed was far more powerful: my name, my voice, and the right to be remembered on my own terms. The storm ended not with noise, but with silence that respected the truth. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about drawing a line and daring to say, no more. The past doesn't define us, but how we confront it does. No one can steal your worth unless you let them. Have you ever had to fight for something they said you didn't deserve? Share your story below, because someone out there needs to be reminded they are not alone. And if this battle moved you, wait until you see what lies beyond this war.